So let me catch you up just a little bit. When I advertise these things, I think I should look back and see what I advertised so I don't end up doing something different. I'm not sure what I said. Um, but really, the idea I had was to focus during Lent, just to take these weeks to focus during Lent on spirituality and just ways to be quiet, to help to still ourselves a bit, to feel more deeply centered. Part of the For me, this year has just been really unsettling. I mean, right now, there's a lot going on in the world and it's a bit unsettling. And I think it's really important to remember that the more grounded we are, the more sort of, if we are, if we're Christian, the more we have this sense of being grounded in the Spirit and in Christ and God, the more we have resources to deal with the kinds of things that are happening around us. And so, how do we do that? And maybe think about that even as just a wider sort of infinite that we are a part of, a wider sense of love, a wider sense of a greater presence than just ourselves. Because otherwise, we start to feel small. We start to feel like that's just me. And how do we connect with that on a different level? So last week I talked a little about contemplative practices, which to me have been a way to ground that way. And I've been doing those off and on for probably, I hate to say it because it's probably 50 years. So, but I mean off and on. So like years without, years back. Then I learn more and then I go back. So in the last 20 years, really 15, I've really been practicing a couple of things, centering prayer and what's secular people would call, I mean, in the secular word, you call mindfulness. And they all have the same roots. And what I want to do is I want to go back and talk a little about the roots, and especially of centering prayer today, and go a little deeper into that. And then we'll do an exercise. But starting from another tradition, I just wanted to mention this that really, with the exile of His Holiness the Dalai Lama from Tibet, there something began to sort of shake and happen in the world, and that was that the people who had been done doing like meditations for many, many, many years in in a particular style, especially with the Dalai Lama and Buddhist style of meditation, suddenly began to sort of move out from there. They began to teach people in the West what they were doing, and people began to take some of that on. And that's partly where the contemporary mindfulness movement came from, was those traditions that moved out from Tibet and just began to move all over. One of the things, though, that the Dalai Lama did beyond teaching meditation was that started to meet with Western scientists, and he met with them and talked about the fact that they have spent so much time studying depression and anxiety and those sorts of states that people get into. And he encouraged them to shift and to really study happiness and positive emotions and what is it that brings people a sense of centeredness and a sense of grounding rather than just the anxiety that many of us feel in this day and age. And so they did. And so now there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies about happiness and about more cultivating a kind of center. And a lot of those come back to just developing a habit of silence, developing a habit of just being, allowing yourself to kind of let thinking go and just be in the present. And last week we used the term presence, which is when my mindfulness teachers say we learn to sit in the present, I think of it as sitting in presence, which is like presence of something greater than myself, is the way that I conceive of it. So this way of doing things has been done for, a long, long, long time in many different traditions, and for good reason. I mean, now they study and they find out that it actually has shifted the way people think, the way they can interact in the world, and all kinds of things. Father Thomas Keating talks about contemplative prayer, and he's the one that kind of brought that back to us. So I wanted to read a couple of quotes from him. Contemplative prayer is really the Christian meditative contemplative tradition. This is really an amazing quote to me. He says, contemplative prayer is the world in which God can do anything. To move into that realm is the greatest adventure. It's to be open to the infinite and hence to infinite possibilities. Our private, self made worlds come to an end. A new world appears within and around us, and the impossible becomes an everyday experience. Yet the world that prayer reveals is barely noticeable in the ordinary course of events. And he talks about this notion of the presence of the spirit, that all prayer is really, and I would say much of meditation is really just being in the presence of spirit, however you understand that term. But contemplative prayer is, there's a really unique definition he gives, and that is that he has this sense that there is this infinite spirit is within us and is around us and is part of our true being in a sense, helping us to helping us to become our truest selves. How's that? And so he says that that in contemplative prayer, he says what's happening is it's not just our own will or the acts of our own will that we're paying attention to. In other words, if we're talking all the time, it's what we think, right? That we're saying, and this is what we want, and this is what we think should happen. But if we're able to quiet that and just be in presence, just pure presence, he says what happens is this, it's the spirit is within us. And he says, actually, he believes it's the spirit praying within us, and we consent to that, which is a lovely way to think about it. He says that spirit prays in us and we consent. And the traditional term for that kind of prayer is contemplation or meditation. There's a Teresa of Avila who wrote in the late 15th century, calls that practice of kind of sitting in presence, silent prayer. She calls that the prayer of the quiet. In the book The Interior Castle, which of course is a wonderful title because it really suggests sort of movement inward, right? Inward to kind of precious space in a sense. She she encourages people to sit in presence and not get caught up in their own thoughts. And I'm going to talk about that just a little bit more in a minute. Not get caught up, but just allowing yourself to be in this purely present moment. When we're thinking, we're kind of usually either in the past or the future. We're trying to, but when we're able to just sit in presence, she says, just allow even a moment of stillness to occur. And I love this, the way she writes about this. She says, the soul shouldn't try to analyze the state she's in. In other words, don't be going, am I doing this right? Am I, da, 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 that kind of thing. She says, it's a gift given to the will, not the intellect. Let the soul enjoy it without any effort beyond a few words. And she talks about that as just being able to be, and that there are times in which maybe, your thoughts get away from you. So I want to talk about that for a few minutes. And this is a little bit of repetition, I know, for some of you that have worked with me, but it was really funny. I just received a little keychain from somebody. They gave me, it has little, wisdom things. You're supposed to put it on your keys. And it just reminds you, to just pause and that kind of stuff. And one of the things it says on there is, you don't have to believe everything you think. And I was reading all this stuff and then I went back and I went, yeah, of course, I know that, but I forget. So I mean, an example of what that means is we tend to overthink things. Well, I mean, we need to think, obviously we need to think, we need to analyze all that. So don't get me wrong. But what happens is that sometimes when something happens to us, our thoughts start to get away from us, right? And the more we mull something over, the what brain scientists have found is that the more we tell ourselves a certain story, whether we made it up or not, the more our brain believes it to be true, which is kind of how you can see how people will do some act out of something you look at and you go, how in the heck did they get there? To think that they could do that. Um, just an example. I mean, I've been thinking I have a friend who I treasure as a good friend who all of a sudden stopped talking to me, like wouldn't return my texts, wouldn't return, except really brief, wouldn't return my calls. And I'm like, what is going on? It just seemed out of the blue to me. So, of course, I start to go, oh my gosh, what did I say? I really must have offended him. So I have all these scenarios in my head about what a horrible human being I am. First of all, we move towards self-hatred pretty easily in the West. Easterners don't seem to do that quite as much, according to the Dalai Lama, but we do. Like what did I do? What did I say? When was the last time we talked? I mean, I have said things to offend people in the past, but you know what? I usually know I did. I usually know. Like I walk away going, "Oh, Gail, you blew that." But I really have no idea. So I'm convincing myself that I'm a horrible human being. And then I shift my thinking and go, oh my gosh, maybe he's sick or depressed or anxious and unable to connect. And then I'm like worried. Then I'm like worried about this person because I'm not getting any response. And I don't really know who else to check in with. But what's so fascinating is it doesn't matter which one of those stories I tell myself, I have no freaking idea if they're true. None. Zero. But the more I tell myself, the more I'm convinced that one of them is true. And, I've lost sleep over this. I lay in bed at night and think, what happened? I thought, lost my friend. I mean, I miss my friend. So you think about what happens when something happens to us and then we start to spin the story. That's what you call that. We spin the story. We actually, if it's bad enough, it's often projecting into the past, something we thought happened, or maybe we were wronged, or we wronged someone, or we're projecting into the future with anxiety of what's about to happen. And what happens is we start just the presence of that thought affects our body, right? You can't sleep, you might not eat, or you might eat too much, depending on who you are. Um, where do things like ulcers and all of those kinds of things come from? They come from worrying and stewing. A lot of things that happen in our bodies come from that. And so we actually can physically become sick. We know our immune system drops when we're anxious. Um, so how do we get ourselves out of that trap of doing that to ourselves? And I always tell students at Chapman, I talked with a lot of college students, and I'm like, the number one thing to remember is you don't have to believe everything you think. Just because you thought it, you don't have to believe it. So I'm trying not to believe those stories and just pray for my friend and be there for when he returns. Um, because our thoughts are really just thoughts. Now, um, I want to read you something that came from a 14th century author. So this is not a new issue. This is the author of The Cloud of Unknowing. The world will be your defense in conflict and in peace. Should some thought go on annoying you, demanding to know what you're doing, then answer with one word. And so one of the things we'll do with centering prayer is you have a word that just you continue to repeat. Answer with one word alone. If your mind begins to intellectualize over the meaning and the connotations, remind you to simply sit in simplicity. Do this, and I assure you these thoughts will vanish. Why? Because you've refused to develop them with arguing. I think that's so great. We argue with our own thoughts, isn't that? That's 14th century. This is nothing new. And there's another lovely little quote from, oh, I love this. Okay. This again is from Teresa of Avila. Can we stop the stars from hurtling across the heavens? No, we cannot stop the mind either. Off it goes. And then we send all the faculties after it. We end up thinking we're lost and blaming ourselves for wasting precious time in the presence of God. The truth is, all this turmoil does not hinder my prayer or interfere with what I'm trying to do. Instead, my soul is whole within its quietude, its love, its longing, and its clarity of consciousness. It's another point. She says it could be, this is that interior castle metaphor. It could be that the soul is fully present with God in the innermost chamber while the mind stays on the periphery of the palace. So even if our mind's going all over, it's okay. But we can learn to quiet that a little bit. So I just want to, what I want to do, I don't want to go on too much longer with that, but what I would like to do is um, to just spend a little bit of time in silence. And I'll guide you if you're not used to it. I'll guide you if you find that my words are troublesome, just kind of drop behind those. You know, you don't even have to listen. You can just take this time in silence. And the thing I would invite you to do at the beginning is to think of a word. I like two-syllable words. We talked about this last week. We talked about the word present or presence, spirit. It can be one syllable if you like, because what we do is we repeat it with each breath. So we repeat a syllable with the in breath and one with the out. But it's one that we'll just keep bringing our attention back to as we're in silence, and just see if you can have a sense of being just completely present. So we're not chasing thoughts. We're not pushing thoughts like, this is my prayer. I hope you're hearing me. You know, we're not doing that. We're like, well, I just want to be in the presence. I mean, and I say this sometimes, I know when I'm in church starting a prayer, but we never call God to us. We never get God to listen to us. If there is God, God is already here, right? That presence, that infinite is already inside, is already um, among us, between us, around us, everywhere. We're just tuning ourselves into it. We're not calling it to us. So I think that's, we don't have to be saying all the right stuff or anything. It's really getting ourselves in a place of presence, bringing ourselves to presence. So I will take you through this. Last week, I used a kind of acronym, which was pause, because that's what this is, Wednesday pause. So we started with just pausing, with becoming just aware of the present. The U is kind of a weird one, but it's unplugging. So every time you hear your thoughts going, you just sort of unplug from that, let it go, and come back. And then just opening your senses, because you can't, I probably said this last week, but if you think about it and let's say you pay attention to sound, you can't hear a sound that happened a minute ago, right? You can't hear a sound that's going to happen. You can only hear a sound that's happening now. So you can have a memory of one maybe, or anticipation. So what we do is we simply stay with what is. We stay with senses. And anytime you stay with any of your senses, that keeps you present. So that's why we start with breath. It's the most accessible thing we have to bring ourselves to in the present, in the beginning.